Welcome to Revisit Books podcast, where we turn books into bite-sized wisdom you can use every day. Today, we are immersing ourselves in what I think is one of the most influential books on achievement published in the last 20 years or so, Outliers, The Story of Success by Malcolm Gladwell. This book, it really shifted the conversation around, personal success.
Oh, absolutely. It really did. Gladwell, he's the #1 best-selling author of The Tipping Point and blank, right?
Yeah.
And when he dropped Outliers back in 2008, it just fundamentally flipped the script on how we think about success.
Yeah.
We're sort of conditioned, aren't we, to believe that extreme success boils down to this simple, almost romantic formula, like raw intelligence plus just relentless ambition.
Right. The lone genius narrative.
Exactly. And Gladwell basically says, hold on, that's actually the least interesting part of the story. He argues the truth is way more complex and, frankly, more interesting.
I really appreciate that shift in focus. It pushes back against that heroic story of the solitary genius working alone. Gladwell moves the spotlight completely away from the individual, like what they're like intrinsically, and puts it squarely on the where and the when. We end up looking at their environment, their culture, their family, and sometimes just the surprising, almost arbitrary circumstances of their birth date even.
Yeah, the birth date thing is wild.
The mission here, as he puts it, is to really unravel the core logic behind who succeeds and, well, who doesn't.
It's really an ecological perspective, isn't it? Gladwell frames the successful person, the outlier, as the hardiest acorn. They've got the potential, sure.
Right.
But, and this is the crucial bit, that potential is almost irrelevant unless it lands in a very specific kind of environment. It needs, deep, rich soil, no competing trees blocking the sunlight.
And avoiding the dangers.
And just sheer luck, frankly, avoiding the rabbits and lumberjacks, as he puts it. So we're not just supposed to admire the towering oak tree. We need to analyze the whole forest ecosystem that allowed it to grow so tall.
And the book does this by connecting people who seem, on the surface, completely different. Like, what hidden factors link someone like Bill Gates with, say, the Beatles?
Right. Or why do top corporate lawyers in New York often share these surprisingly specific resume points? It's uncanny.
And what fundamental advantage do star athletes possess that isn't just raw physical talent? It always comes back to this idea of the ecology of success.
Precisely. And if you start to understand success as this ecological thing, it forces you really to look past just simple effort or grit. You have to acknowledge the systems, the timing, the legacies that give certain people advantages. #tag2, who's it for? Understanding the unseen hand of achievement.
Okay, so let's talk about the practical side. Who should really pay attention to this discussion? If you, listening right now, are maybe responsible for evaluating talent or building teams or even designing educational programs, why does this ecological view matter?
Well, I think this discussion is vital for anyone who needs to understand how achievement actually works in the real world. It helps you move beyond that overly simplistic idea that talent and hard work alone are always enough.
Because often they aren't.
They aren't. So if you're involved in hiring maybe or coaching, or if you've ever just looked at a really successful person and thought, that story feels a bit too neat, then this is definitely for you. Gladwell gives you the tools, the critical lens to look past the mythology of the purely self-made individual.
Yeah, it's definitely aimed at the skeptic in us, the person who hears stories like Benjamin Franklin supposedly rising from nothing, and suspects, there were probably some specific societal advantages at play that often get glossed over.
Exactly. Understanding the power of environment, of circumstance, of sheer timing, it allows us to critically assess the opportunities we've been given, maybe without even realizing it.
Or maybe more importantly, the opportunities we're currently providing or not providing to others, whether it's our kids, our students, our employees.
Absolutely. And a perfect example of how environment can just totally trump individual factors is right at the start of the book. The opening anecdote about the town of Roseto, Pennsylvania. It's a remarkable way to kick things off, establishing the sheer power of community.
Right, Roseto. Tell us about that. What made this little town such an outlier?
Okay, so back in the late 1950s, early 60s, there was this physician, Stuart Wolfe, and he stumbled upon something really strange in Roseto. It was this tiny town populated almost entirely by immigrants from the same small region in Italy near Rome.
Okay.
And what he found was that the people there had remarkably low rates of heart disease. Significantly lower. Their death rate from heart disease was something like 3 times lower than in neighboring towns.
Wow. And these neighboring towns had similar people.
Yeah, similar demographic makeup, similar hardworking European immigrants. So Wolf initially thought, okay, it must be genetics, right? Or maybe their diet or exercise habits, the usual suspect.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But the reality was, well, confusing.
Completely confounding, because when they looked closer, the Rosatins weren't exactly health nuts. They were actually struggling with obesity. Quite a few smoked heavily.
Oh,
And get this, they weren't even cooking with the healthy Mediterranean olive oil they would have used back in Italy. Because of where they settled in Pennsylvania, they'd switched to using lard.
so definitely not paragons of modern health advice.
Not even close. And Wolf did something else clever. He tracked down relatives of the Rosatins who had moved elsewhere in the U.S., and guess what?
They had normal U.S. heart disease rates.
Bingo. Those relatives shared the same high heart disease rates as the general American population. So the secret wasn't their genes. It wasn't the specific geography of Pennsylvania. It had to be Roseto itself. It was the structure, the culture, the world they had built there.
So what was it? What specific things were happening in Roseto that made them so unusually healthy, despite, the lard?
It came down to their incredibly supportive community structure. Roseto had basically transplanted and maintained its old world Italian village ethos. You had multiple generations living under one roof or very close by. There was constant mutual support.
A real safety net.
A huge one. And crucially, they had this intense egalitarian culture. The community actively, almost forcefully, discouraged the wealthy from flaunting their success. There was a real effort to keep everyone on a similar social footing, which created a deep, supportive buffer for those who weren't doing as well. There was this unique lack of status anxiety.
Wait, so if someone made a lot of money, they were kind of expected to keep it quiet, not build a bigger house or drive a fancier car?
Pretty much, yeah. They didn't use wealth to distinguish themselves aggressively from their neighbors, and this tight-knit, relatively equal system acted like this powerful shield against the kind of chronic stress that's so common in modern industrial life. And that lack of stress, Wolf concluded, translated directly into tangible physical health benefits, better heart health.
That's incredible. It really demonstrates, doesn't it, that the values and the structure of the world you inhabit, your community, can profoundly affect who you are, right down to your physical body and how long you live.
Absolutely. And that connection is key for the rest of the book. If a community structure can influence something as fundamental as physical health so dramatically, just imagine the power it holds over things like professional success or achievement.
Right. So let's dive into some of those major takeaways that really break down this path to becoming an outlier. Starting with maybe the most surprising one, the sheer power of when you happen to be born.
Okay, so the first big idea really revolves around this concept of a cumulative advantage.
All right.
It's something sociologist Robert Merton called the Matthew effect.
Based on the Bible verse.
Yeah, exactly, from the Gospel of Matthew. For unto everyone the hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. Basically, it means that small early advantages, even completely arbitrary ones, tend to compound over time, making the gap between the haves and have-nots wider and wider.
It snowballs.
It snowballs. And the most compelling, almost absurdly clear evidence Gladwell presents for this is found in Canadian junior hockey, which you'd think should be about as pure meritocracy as you can get, right? Focused solely on skill. You would absolutely think so. But when you actually look at the rosters of the elite major junior A leagues in Canada, the players' birth months are overwhelmingly clustered right at the beginning of the year, January, February, March.
It's bizarre. Like reading a list of star signs.
It really is. The book highlights rosters where it's just Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces over and over again. Very few players born late in the year.
And the explanation is so simple, but its effect is just structurally devastating. It's the eligibility cutoff date, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. In Canada, the cutoff date for age class hockey registration is January 1st. Now think about kids at that crucial formative age, maybe 9 or 10 years old. A boy born on January 2nd is potentially almost a full year older, physically, than his teammate born in late December of the same year.
Right. At that age, a year is a massive difference in size, coordination, maybe even speed.
Huge difference. So inevitably, the slightly older, bigger, more coordinated kids get noticed early on. They get misidentified by coaches as having more natural talent.
Even though it's really just maturity.
It's mostly just maturity at that stage. But here's where the self-fulfilling prophecy kicks in, and this is the core of the Matthew effect in action. The system, believing it's found the best kids, channels these slightly older ones onto the elite rep squads or all-star teams.
So they get the better opportunities.
Immediately, they get the best coaching, They practice way more often, maybe twice as much. They play against better competition. They get more ice time during games. And this differentiated experience piled on year after year for 4 or 5 years.
It turns that initial, small, arbitrary age advantage into a genuine skill difference later on.
Precisely. The extra practice, the better coaching, it makes them actually better players, which then justifies the initial and false judgment that they were simply more talented from the start. Meanwhile, the kids born in November or December, who might have had just as much potential, get overlooked early on, get less coaching, less practice, and they fall further behind. They get locked into these patterns of relative underachievement simply because of their birth month.
It's kind of horrifying when you think about it. It shows this incredible systemic inefficiency. The very system designed to find and nurture talent is actually filtering out potentially great players based on something totally random.
Totally random. And the book points out this isn't just a weird quirk of Canadian hockey.
No, it shows up elsewhere too, right?
Oh, yeah. Gladwell mentions looking at international soccer teams. For instance, the rosters of the 2007 Czech national junior soccer team showed almost no players born after midsummer. Same dynamic. An arbitrary cutoff date favoring relatively older kids within the age band.
So we're potentially squandering huge amounts of talent in sports, and presumably other fields too, just because of these rigid, arbitrary cutoffs. We fail to cultivate potential simply because we don't look past the kid who's just superficially a bit bigger or more developed at age 9.
That's the argument. The system is designed to find the best, but its own structure makes it blind to potential in almost half the population.
Okay, so this idea of compounding advantage, getting those early opportunities, leads us right into Gladwell's most famous concept.
Yeah.
The 10,000-hour rule. This came from the foundational research of psychologist K. Anders Ericsson, right? And we really need to stress the deliberate part of that practice.
Yes. Deliberate practice is absolutely the key qualifier. It's not just putting in time passively. It has to be structured, highly focused, often intensely effortful. It usually involves pushing yourself right to the edge of your current abilities, concentrating specifically on your weaknesses, often with feedback.
Right, not just noodling around on the guitar for 10,000 hours.
Exactly. Erickson's original study, which Gladwell popularized, looked at violinists at the elite Berlin Academy of Music. And what he found was striking. Once a musician was skilled enough to even get into that top academy.
So they were all already very good.
They were all highly talented, yes. But the only thing that reliably separated the truly world-class elite performers from the merely good ones was the sheer volume of deliberate practice they had accumulated over their lives.
And the magic number came out around.
Around 10,000 hours by age 20 for the elite group. The study found no naturals people who just soared to the top with relatively little practice. And, maybe just as importantly, they found no grinds people who practice obsessively way more than 10,000 hours, but failed to reach that elite level. It really seemed to be the scale and the quality of that focused effort that made the difference.
Okay, but 10,000 hours, I mean, that's a colossal amount of time, especially for a young person.
It's almost an insurmountable barrier if you think about it practically. And this is the core insight Gladwell adds. It's all but impossible, he says, for a young adult to rack up that many hours of deliberate practice without significant external support. Or what Gladwell essentially calls patronage.
Meaning
You need parents or a special program or some kind of system that frees you up from, having to work a part-time job after school or worrying about paying bills. Something that allows you to dedicate almost all your non-school, non-sleep time exclusively to that demanding, focused work required for mastery. You need someone or something to make that time available.
the book uses a couple of really spectacular examples to show how unique circumstances can provide this kind of, well, uninterrupted time windfall. First up, the Beatles.
Ah, the Beatles. So before they blew up in America, they actually had about 7 years of playing together, getting ready. But their real trial by fire, their 10,000-hour crucible, happened in Hamburg, Germany, between 1960 and 1962.
Right, the club scene there.
They were basically hired as resident bands in these rough clubs in the red light district. And the contracts were insane. They were forced to play for incredibly long stretches, sometimes 5, sometimes up to 8 hours a night.
8 hours. Wow.
7 nights a week. Gladwell calculates they played something like 270 nights in just under 2 years. John Lennon apparently said they just got better and had more confidence because they had to play for hours and hours on end. They had to find ways to fill the time, keep the audience engaged, experiment constantly.
So they weren't just rehearsing, they were performing live, under pressure, for staggering amounts of time.
Exactly. They logged an estimated 1,200 live performances before they even had their first major hit. Think about that. Most bands today might not reach that number in their entire careers. That intense, relentless, forced volume of performance, which is a form of deliberate practice driven purely by the commercial demands of the Hamburg club owners, was what truly forged them. It gave them an incredible edge in musical stamina, stage presence, and repertoire when they finally hit the big time.
It was their unique, accidental 10,000 hours. And then there's the ultimate tech success story, Bill Gates. He also had his own version of Hamburg, didn't he? But driven more by technological luck and timing.
Absolutely. Gates' success story is fascinating because it's where his obvious brilliance intersects with what Gladwell calls an incredibly lucky series of events. He was born at just the right time, basically. He was 13 years old in 1968.
Why was that timing so critical?
Because 1968 was right around when computer technology was shifting towards time-sharing terminals. These allowed for interactive programming, which was revolutionary. But this kind of access was exceedingly rare and incredibly expensive back then. Most universities didn't even have what Gates got access to in high school.
Because he had the amazing luck to attend Lakeside School in Seattle.
Exactly. Lakeside was a wealthy private school, and it happened to be one of the very, very few high schools in the entire world at that time that had invested in a time-sharing computer terminal. That was opportunity number one.
And when the school's initial budget for computer time ran out, the support systems just kept miraculously appearing for him, right?
It's kind of amazing. The Lakeside Mothers Club, these wealthy, civic-minded parents, held a fundraiser and paid for more expensive computer time when the first source dried up. Opportunity number two.
Okay.
Then, when that ran low, a parent who worked at a local tech startup called C-Cubed basically offered Gates and his small group of computer buddies free programming time on their mainframe during evenings and weekends.
In exchange for...
In exchange for them debugging the company's new software. So they were effectively being paid in unlimited hands-on practice hours on a sophisticated machine. Opportunity number 3, 4, 5. It just keeps going.
It almost gets logistically absurd with the story about him sneaking out late at night to get even more computer time.
It really does. When the C-Cubed arrangement eventually became too restrictive, Gates and his friend Paul Allen discovered they could sneak into the University of Washington's computer center. Apparently, the mainframe was less busy between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m.
So picture this. A high school kid routinely sneaking out of his house after midnight to go code on a university mainframe for hours before the sun came up.
It perfectly captures the convergence. Yes, extraordinary focus and passion from Gates, but enabled by unparalleled, almost unbelievable opportunity. By the time Gates famously dropped out of Harvard to start Microsoft, he'd already been programming pretty much nonstop for 7 years. Gladwell estimates he was way past 10,000 hours.
So his genius was the engine, absolutely. But that string of lucky breaks, the access, the financial support, the cultural moment, that was the essential track that allowed that engine to reach maximum speed.
That's the argument. The opportunities provided the sheer volume of practice needed for mastery.
Okay, so if getting those 10,000 hours of supported, deliberate practice is so critical, let's reconsider the role of just raw brain power, raw intelligence. The book makes a really interesting argument that IQ, that measurable analytical intelligence, is actually less important than we tend to think once you get past a certain point.
Right, this is the IQ threshold concept, and it's pretty compelling. Research cited in the book suggests that the strong correlation we see between IQ and real-world success kind of breaks down once someone reaches an IQ of roughly 120 or so.
120, which is considered, what? Superior intelligence, but not genius level.
Exactly. It indicates more than enough analytical horsepower to master highly complex material, like in law school or graduate-level science. But the point is, above that threshold, going from an IQ of, say, 130 all the way up to an IQ of 180 doesn't seem to make you significantly more likely to win a Nobel Prize or become a top CEO or achieve that kind of outlier success.
It's like the height example you mentioned earlier with basketball. Michael Jordan, at 6'6", was definitely tall enough to excel in professional basketball. Being 6'10" instead might not have made him that much better, because past that tall enough point, other skills become the real differentiators: speed, court sense, agility.
Precisely the same logic applies to intelligence, Gladwell argues. Once you cross that analytical threshold, once you're smart enough, what starts to matter much more aren't additional IQ points, but other things. And specifically, something he calls practical intelligence.
Practical intelligence. How is that different from analytical intelligence or IQ?
It's fundamentally different. Analytical intelligence is about abstract problem solving, the kind measured by IQ tests. Practical intelligence is more procedural knowledge. It's knowing how to do something in the real world rather than just knowing what something is. Gladwell defines it as knowing what to say to whom, knowing when to say it, and knowing how to say it for maximum effect.
So it's about social skills, navigating situations, reading people, understanding systems.
Exactly. It's the ability to effectively manage and influence complex social and institutional environments to get what you want. And critically, this is really important, practical intelligence and analytical intelligence, IQ, are orthogonal.
Meaning they're independent. One doesn't predict the other.
Right. You can have a stratospherically high IQ and almost zero practical intelligence, or you could have average analytical intelligence but be brilliant at navigating the world. And this difference is perfectly, almost painfully, illustrated by the contrast Gladwell draws between Chris Langan and Robert Oppenheimer.
Okay, Chris Langan. He had one of the highest recorded IQs ever, right? Around 195. The ultimate outlier in pure brain power.
Absolutely off the charts, a truly one in a million kind of mind. Yet, Langan possessed almost no practical intelligence, largely, Gladwell argues, because of his incredibly difficult, poor, and chaotic upbringing. He never learned how to navigate the systems of the world effectively.
And this showed up when he got opportunities.
Tragically, yes. He won a scholarship to Reed College, a very prestigious school, but his mother apparently missed a deadline for renewing the financial aid paperwork. Langan, who had never been taught how to deal with bureaucracy or advocate for himself assertively, essentially failed to challenge the administration effectively. He couldn't navigate the system.
So he lost the scholarship.
He lost the scholarship over a missed form. That's a failure of practical intelligence, not analytical intelligence. Later, he was at Montana State University, and his old car broke down. He asked the dean if he could switch his schedule to afternoon classes. The dean basically gave him a hard time, saying something like, "Well, son, everyone has to make sacrifices to get an education."
And Langan's reaction.
Langan, feeling insulted and again unable to manage that institutional interaction effectively, just dropped out. His immense intellectual gifts were undeniable, but his inability to manage the world that required those gifts ultimately rendered them much less effective in achieving conventional success.
Wow. Now, contrast that with Robert Oppenheimer, the brilliant physicist who famously led the Manhattan Project. Also very high IQ.
Also very high IQ, but crucially, Oppenheimer came from a background of immense wealth, privilege, and sophistication in New York City. He had practical intelligence in spades. And the story Gladwell uses is startling. As a graduate student at Cambridge, Oppenheimer was apparently struggling with depression and experimental work, and he actually tried to poison his tutor.
Seriously. That sounds like something that gets you kicked out immediately, maybe even arrested.
You would think so. It's an incredibly serious act. Yet somehow, Oppenheimer managed to navigate the situation. Using his practical intelligence, his ability to negotiate, charm, understand the institutional dynamics, he talked his way out of being expelled. He was merely put on probation and required to see a psychiatrist.
Sounds unbelievable.
It shows an extraordinary ability to manage a potentially disastrous situation. Fast forward 20 years, General Leslie Groves is looking for someone to lead the scientific side of the Manhattan Project, the hugely complex, top-secret effort to build the atomic bomb. Oppenheimer, despite having no large-scale administrative experience and some questionable political affiliations, somehow charmed and persuaded Groves to give him the job.
How did he do that?
Gladwell argues he used his highly developed practical intelligence. He understood what Groves, an engineer, cared about the practical, cross-disciplinary challenges. And Oppenheimer likely leveraged what Gladwell, citing sociologist Annette Lareau, calls a sense of entitlement learned from his privileged upbringing. This is the result of a parenting style Lareau calls concerted cultivation.
Concerted cultivation. What does that involve?
It's a style common in middle and upper-class families where parents actively foster their children's talents, schedule lots of organized activities, and most importantly, teach their kids how to interact with authority figures. They teach them to ask questions, to challenge rules they don't understand, to negotiate on their own behalf, to see institutions not as intimidating monoliths, but as sisters they can actively manage and even manipulate to their advantage.
Whereas Langan was raised in poverty, likely with a parenting style Lareau calls accomplishment of natural growth, where kids have more autonomy, but institutions are seen as powerful, unchangeable authorities you just have to obey or avoid.
Exactly. That crucial difference in cultivated practical intelligence, those learned skills of navigating the world, is arguably what separated Oppenheimer the functioning genius who achieved immense historical impact, from Langan, the potentially even brighter mind who struggled to find his footing in conventional terms.
It really underlines that being smart isn't enough. You need to know how to use that intelligence within the structures of the world.
And the source material even mentions a study from Michigan Law School that reinforces this. It found that minority students who were admitted with lower LSAT scores in college grades than their white peers ended up being just as successful in their legal careers after graduation, measured by income, career satisfaction, community involvement.
Why?
Because once everyone met the threshold of being smart enough to handle law school, that IQ 120 plus range, real-world success depended far more on those cultivated practical soft skills. Advocacy, networking, reading situations, managing clients, navigating firm politics. Skills not measured by the LSAT.
Okay, so we've looked at timing, practice, opportunity, and practical intelligence. Now let's zoom out even further. Gladwell argues that deep-seated cultural legacies, these historical patterns of belief and behavior inherited over generations, can profoundly shape our potential for achievement, sometimes in surprising ways. Just like the community structure shaped health in Roseto.
Absolutely. Culture casts a long shadow. Let's go back to the world of law for a moment, specifically the story of Joe Flom and other top Jewish lawyers in mid-century New York City. This is a fantastic example of how initial disadvantage can morph into opportunity due to cultural and historical shifts.
Right, so back in the 1940s and 50s, the big, established, prestigious white shoe law firms, the ones run by the WASP establishment, handling respectable corporate contracts and banking work, were notoriously discriminatory. They largely excluded Jewish lawyers from their ranks.
They were effectively shut out of the most lucrative and respected parts of the legal profession at the time. So where did that leave ambitious Jewish lawyers like Joe Flom or the founders of firms like Wachtel Lipton?
They had to take the work the establishment didn't want.
Exactly. They were forced into the legal scraps, the areas the white shoe firms disdained as being, well, a bit unseemly or unpredictable. This included things like litigation, actually going to court and arguing, which the old guard preferred to avoid, and, crucially, hostile corporate takeovers, often done through proxy fights.
So work that was seen as confrontational, messy.
Messy, unpredictable, not quite gentlemanly. But here's the twist. This initial exclusion, this significant institutional disadvantage, ironically became their greatest asset decades later.
Because the business world changed dramatically in the 1970s and 80s.
Precisely. The corporate takeover boom hit Wall Street. Suddenly, mergers and acquisitions, including hostile ones, became a massive, high-stakes, extremely lucrative area of law, and who had spent the previous 20 years inadvertently honing exactly the skills needed for this new world.
The lawyers who had been forced into it because they couldn't get the good jobs earlier.
Joe Flom, Marty Lipton, and their peers. They had accumulated 2 decades of specialized expertise in precisely the kind of complex adversarial legal work that was suddenly in huge demand. So all the things that initially seemed like disadvantages, being Jewish, coming from poor immigrant backgrounds, being born during the Depression era, which actually meant less competition for elite school spots due to lower birth rates, another lucky break Gladwell calls the demographic trough, unexpectedly combined with historical timing to become enormous advantages.
It's a fascinating case of adversity turning into opportunity purely because the rules of the game changed.
It really is. Now, on the flip side, we see a different kind of deep cultural legacy when Gladwell examines the reasons behind the consistently high performance of students from Asian backgrounds in mathematics. He traces it back thousands of years to the specific cultural traditions forged by wet rice agriculture.
Rice paddies and math, how does he connect those?
It's one of the most thought-provoking arguments in the book. He argues that wet rice farming, which dominated agriculture in southern China, Japan, and Korea for centuries, is fundamentally different from, say, European wheat or corn farming.
How so?
It's incredibly skill-oriented and intensely labor-intensive. Growing rice successfully in flooded paddies requires tremendous precision, coordination, patience, and constant backbreaking effort throughout the year. Gladwell cites estimates suggesting traditional wet rice farming might require up to 3,000 hours of focused work per hectare per year.
Wow. Compared to what for European farming?
Maybe 1,000 to 1,200 hours for a typical medieval European peasant growing wheat or barley. Rice farming is also unique in that there's a very clear, direct relationship between effort and reward. The harder and more meticulously you tend your paddy managing the water levels, transplanting seedlings just right, weeding constantly, the more rice you will harvest. There's less reliance on unpredictable factors like rainfall compared to dryland farming.
Okay, so it's demanding, precise work where effort clearly pays off. How does that translate to math?
Gladwell argues this agricultural reality created a powerful cultural legacy across East Asia that deeply values persistence, diligence, and the belief that hard work leads directly to success. It's reflected in traditional proverbs he quotes, like, "No one who can rise before dawn 360 days a year fails to make his family rich." This cultural mindset emphasizes effort over innate ability.
And success in mathematics, especially complex math, often boils down to persistence, doesn't it? The willingness to struggle with a hard problem.
Exactly. Gladwell suggests that success in math is often less about having some innate math gene and more about having the right attitude specifically, the culturally ingrained willingness to keep working at a difficult problem long after others might give up in frustration. It's about persistence.
And he connects this directly to the success of schools like the KIPP Academy in the South Bronx, which serves low-income students.
Yes. KIPP and schools like it effectively try to instill this rice paddy work ethic in an urban American setting. They do this by dramatically extending the school day, having Saturday classes, shortening summer vacation, essentially increasing the amount of time students spend engaged in focused learning. They're countering the summer slide, often seen in disadvantaged kids, and teaching them, implicitly and explicitly, the miracle of meaningful work, as Gladwell puts it. They provide the structure and cultural expectation that diligent effort yields results, especially in challenging subjects like math.
So culture can be a powerful engine for potential, but it can also constrain potential, right? As shown in the really sobering example of the Korean air crashes.
Yes, this is a truly devastating real-world example of how a specific cultural legacy, in this case, relating to hierarchy and communication, can have catastrophic consequences in a modern high-stakes environment like an airplane cockpit. For a period in the 80s and 90s, Korean Air had a disturbingly high crash rate compared to other major airlines.
And the investigation pointed towards communication issues rooted in Korean culture.
Primarily, yes. It related to something called the Power Distance Index, or PDI, which comes from the work of sociologist Geert Hofstede on cultural dimensions.
Power Distance Index. Let's quickly unpack that for listeners.
Okay. PDI basically measures the extent to which the less powerful members of a society accept and even expect that power is distributed unequally. In high PDI cultures, there's a strong sense of hierarchy, deference to authority is deeply ingrained, and subordinates are very hesitant to challenge or speak bluntly to superiors. South Korea ranks very high on the PDI scale.
And how did this play out in the cockpit?
It led to a dangerous phenomenon called mitigated speech, especially from first officers, the co-pilots, when communicating with the captain, who holds immense authority in that cultural context. Even in urgent or critical situations, the first officers would often use language that was indirect, tentative, softened, or deferential, rather than being clear, direct, and assertive.
They would hint instead of stating the problem clearly.
Exactly. Gladwell details the black box recording from Korean Air Flight 801, which crashed in Guam in 1997. In the critical minutes before the crash, the first officer was clearly concerned about the bad weather and the fact that the captain seemed overly reliant on the visual approach, which was becoming impossible. But instead of saying something direct like, "Captain, the visibility is too low, we need to abort the landing and rely on instruments," he used mitigated speech.
What did he say?
Things like, "Captain, the weather radar has helped us a lot up to now." It was a hint, an incredibly subtle suggestion that maybe they shouldn't rely only on visual cues anymore.
And the captain, who was likely tired and possibly stressed,
Completely missed the urgent warning embedded in that deferential language. He probably registered it as just a casual observation. The engineer in the back seat was even more indirect. The true meaning, "we are about to fly into a hill because we can't see," was tragically lost in layers of cultural deference.
that's terrifying. And this wasn't an isolated incident.
No, similar communication breakdowns rooted in high power distance were implicated in other crashes, including the Avianca Flight 052 crash in New York, where the Colombian crew, Colombia also has a high PDI, used mitigated speech like, "We are running low on fuel," when they should have used the unambiguous internationally mandated phrase, "We have a fuel emergency," to convey the true severity to American air traffic control.
So what was the solution for Korean Air? How did they fix such a deeply ingrained cultural issue?
The fix was brilliantly sociological, implemented by an outsider, David Greenberg, who was brought in from Delta Airlines. He recognized the cultural communication pattern as the core problem, his solution. He mandated that English become the primary required language of communication in all Korean Air cockpits.
Why English specifically?
Because English, in the context of international aviation, operates within the framework of a relatively low-power distance culture-think American or British norms. Aviation English requires directness, clarity, and assertiveness regardless of rank. By forcing the Korean crews to communicate exclusively in English, Greenberg effectively compelled them to adopt the communication norms associated with that language and its cultural context. They had to drop their ingrained habits of mitigated speech and deference.
They had to speak the language of low power distance.
Precisely. This seemingly simple linguistic change fundamentally re-engineered the cultural dynamics in the cockpit. It dramatically improved communication clarity and assertiveness, leading to a radical and permanent improvement in Korean Air's safety record. It's powerful proof that while cultural legacies are strong, they aren't necessarily destiny. They can be understood and sometimes successfully modified or managed.
So after weaving through all these interconnected threads, the arbitrary luck of being born in January for a hockey player, the incredible series of opportunities that allowed Bill Gates his 10,000 hours, the unexpected way being excluded helped Jewish lawyers, the deep roots of work ethic and rice paddies, and even how changing the language in a cockpit saved lives. What's the big takeaway? What's the definitive core message about success that Gladwell leaves us with?
I think the absolute core message is that the successful individual, the outlier, isn't really this heroic, self-made genius who defied all odds through sheer willpower alone. In fact, Gladwell concludes the outlier, in the end, is not an outlier at all.
Meaning they're actually products of their environment, not exceptions to it.
Exactly. They're complex products of their specific history, their community, the extraordinary opportunities they were given, some earned, some just lucky, and the deep cultural legacies they inherited. It's this vast, intricate web of advantages, often invisible or unacknowledged, that plays a critical role. No superstar, no outlier ever truly makes it entirely on their own.
The book really works to demystify great achievement, doesn't it? It suggests we should shift our focus, instead of just standing back and marveling at the few who reach the very top.
Yeah, instead of looking at someone like Bill Gates, who got essentially unlimited access to a cutting-edge computer terminal as a 13-year-old back in 1968, and just saying, wow, what a genius.
We should be asking a different question, a much bigger, maybe more provocative question.
We should be asking, okay, that was amazing luck for him, but what if a million teenagers back then had been given that same kind of unparalleled, sustained opportunity? How many more Bill Gateses, how many more Microsofts or equivalent breakthroughs would we have today?
Right. The implication is that we're leaving a massive amount of potential on the table because our systems for cultivating talent are often based on luck and arbitrary advantages.
That's the heart of it. The book's ultimate point, I think, is a societal one. If we really want to build a better, more prosperous world, we need to stop relying on this patchwork of lucky breaks and arbitrary advantages, like happening to be born in the right month or having wealthy parents who can fund your 10,000 hours or teach you practical intelligence.
We need to be more intentional about creating opportunities.
We need to intentionally build a society that actively seeks out and provides those fundamental opportunities: access, quality coaching, sufficient time, the right cultural messages for everyone. Because if we do that, if we systematically replace luck with opportunity, we don't just help individuals, we maximize the total pool of human talent, and that makes the entire world much richer in the process.
That's today's breakdown. While this discussion cannot replace the book's full text, it can offer a glimpse into its teachings. I hope you found this discussion helpful, and I look forward to sharing more. Let me know what book next you want to discuss.